Can America truly win a global tech war against China when, well, the biggest casualties seem to be our own technology companies? Okay, let's unpack this because it's pretty complicated. There's this crucial, really high-stakes battle heating up right now. It's over the sale of key computer chip design software. These are tools known as electronic design automation, or EEA. And for you listening, if you're not deep in the chip world, this isn't just basic coding software. No, this is the fundamental infrastructure that lets companies design the most advanced, the most complex microchips on the planet. Now, we're hearing from some powerful voices in Washington. Think Senator Tom Cotton, Representative Michael McCall. They're urgently pushing the Commerce Department to tighten restrictions.
Huh.
Their argument that American software, from giants like Cadence and Synopsys, is actually being used by Chinese entities and used to design chips for advanced military purposes. They're specifically pointing to things like hypersonic weapons development. The logic seems simple on the surface. If we sell them the tools to build the blueprints, we potentially lose our strategic edge.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here, or maybe concerning, is how the current approach seems to be working. Or rather, how it's not working as intended. These export controls, the ones targeting specific Chinese firms on the BIS entity list, they're creating this profound, unintended side effect.
Okay.
Instead of, inflicting lasting harm on China's tech sector, these controls seem to be acting more like a surgical cut that actually pushes China to heal faster, maybe even stronger, while we feel the pain.
That sounds counterintuitive.
It does. And we're diving into a really powerful new economic study today that looked at exactly this, the real-world ripple effects of these sanctions, both here and in China, and the hard evidence. It suggests that while U.S. companies face serious financial hits and even a decline in their innovation quality.
So hurting our own engine.
Exactly. Hurting our own competitive engine. At the same time, these very controls are accelerating China's big strategic push towards total technological self-reliance. It's looking like an asymmetric loss scenario for the U.S. right now.
Less like a clever strategy, more like a strategic own goal, perhaps.
You could frame it that way, based on this data.
Okay. So our mission in this deep dive is clear. Let's look at the market data that shows this immediate financial shock to American businesses. Then, let's detail exactly how Beijing seems to be turning this challenge into a huge domestic innovation opportunity. And finally, we need to connect that back to these proposed new software curbs, the ones that go way beyond just chips, and figure out what they really mean for global supply chains down the road.
Sounds good.
All right, let's start with that immediate financial fallout. When the U.S. government puts a major Chinese tech company on the entity list, what happens? What's the instant measurable reaction from the market? Who bleeds first?
Well, the reaction is instant. And the data is pretty stark.
Yeah.
The pain is definitely asymmetric. We looked at what financial economists call cumulative abnormal returns, or CARs. You can think of this as the stock market's immediate sort of cold-blooded prediction of future revenue. Changes how investor sentiment shifts right after a big announcement like this.
Okay, so what did the CARs show for U.S. companies?
For the U.S. suppliers, the companies selling components or services to those sanctioned Chinese firms, the news immediately triggered significant investor fear. Across that critical 11-day window, right around the announcement, investors basically wiped nearly 3% off the anticipated future value of these American companies.
Wow, 3% just like that.
Just like that. And that's a measurable financial hit, reflecting real worries about lost revenue and, operational headaches.
But you said asymmetric, so the Chinese market saw the opposite.
Precisely. And this is the really critical part. Chinese domestic suppliers, the companies that compete directly with those American firms now facing restrictions, they showed positive CARs.
So their stocks went up?
Essentially, yes. The market immediately anticipated that they would be the ones to step in, replace their U.S. competitors, and grab more market share. Instead of signaling scarcity or disruption in China, the sanctions announcement actually signaled opportunity. The market priced in an immediate profit lift of nearly 3.5% for these domestic Chinese suppliers just in those first few days.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting then. This split, this divergence, it shows the sanctions immediately shouted opportunity in Beijing's market while spelling potential disaster, or at least contraction, in the U.S. market.
That's a perfect way to put it.
It really signals that the policy as it stands isn't creating the intended leverage, is it?
It certainly doesn't appear to be. based on that immediate market reaction. And look, the short-term pain for U.S. firms was probably expected at the point of friction, but the truly massive unintended consequence was how this policy seemed to galvanize China's own innovation efforts. It's almost like Beijing received a government-sponsored multi-billion-dollar push to achieve self-sufficiency, and faster than planned.
So how did those specific sanctioned firms react? Did they just, wither? Or did they fight back?
They pivoted aggressively. The study shows that the Chinese firms placed directly on the entity list, and these are typically in the most advanced sectors, semiconductors, communications. They immediately and significantly ramped up their R&D investment.
Ramping up R&D.
Yeah, we're talking substantial increases. It translates to something like almost $35 million in new domestic research funding per affected company on average, a big jump. But here's the really telling part, where they put that money.
Okay.
They crucially prioritized filing high-value invention patents.
Hold on. Why is the type of patent so important here? For you listening, maybe you don't track IP law closely. What's the difference between an invention patent and just, like, a regular patent?
That's a fantastic question, because it signals their strategy. It's not just about coping. It's about building something new. See, utility patents often cover smaller improvements, technical tweaks, maybe adapting existing tech. An invention patent, though, aims for breakthrough technology, something genuinely new, foundational.
Okay.
So by prioritizing those, they're signaling a strategic focus on radical self-sufficiency. They want to create entirely new technological foundations that don't depend on the West. They're playing the long game.
So, far from being starved of tech, they're essentially being forced to innovate faster in critical areas, and they're documenting it with their own IP.
That's what the data suggests.
And I imagine that effort spread beyond just the companies directly hit by the sanctions.
Oh, absolutely. The whole ecosystem reacted defensively, you could say. Other Chinese companies, the ones not sanctioned, but who imported the same kinds of embargoed American products.
Yeah.
They also boosted their R&D spending. And they actually enjoyed some positive financial spillover effects, too, like a small but statistically significant bump in their return on assets.
So they saw a gap opening up.
Exactly. They saw the sanctions creating a guaranteed market gap, and they knew they likely had state backing to fill the vacuum left by the American suppliers.
Wow. And did it spread even wider? Like, to their suppliers?
It did. Even industries adjacent to those directly affected Chinese suppliers showed positive effects. Think about the companies that supply materials or components to the chip makers or telecom firms. These adjacent sectors increased their R&D staff, boosted their R&D spending. It confirms this widespread, almost coordinated effort to build a more resilient domestic supply chain. They're becoming substitutes for goods that previously came from U.S. firms.
And they hired people.
They did. Significantly expanded their workforce, too.
Yeah.
Hiring thousands of new engineers, researchers. It confirms the policy seems to have inadvertently strengthened the overall Chinese industrial base, not weakened it.
It's astonishing that a policy meant to isolate and weaken seems to be having this opposite effect, coordinating and strengthening their domestic capabilities.
The data certainly points that way.
So let's flip back to the U.S. side. What does this aggressive Chinese push for self-reliance mean for the American firms, the ones we maybe intended to protect or at least not harm? The research indicates they took serious hits, right? Not just profits, but long-term competitiveness.
That erosion of the competitive edge is, I think, the most concerning finding from the U.S. perspective. U.S. suppliers saw a really notable decline in their innovation performance.
How do you measure that?
Well, you look at the influence and importance of their patents, and the study found significant reductions in patent value and, critically, in patent citations.
Citations meaning how often other inventors build on their work.
Exactly. Fewer citations suggest their intellectual property became weaker, less foundational for future global research. It points to a deterioration in the actual quality and long-term influence of American innovation in these key sectors.
And the practical financial pain that goes along with that innovation decline.
It's stark. Beyond just the drop in innovation quality, these U.S. suppliers face quantifiable financial setbacks. Reductions in revenue that's obvious, from lost sales to China. But also, significantly, reductions in employee numbers. They had to shrink their workforce. That means a direct loss of high-value American jobs in critical tech industries.
And this wasn't just isolated to the few companies directly dealing with, say, Huawei or SMIC.
Yeah.
This pain spread.
Absolutely. The negative spillover was systemic across related U.S. tech sectors. Firms in the same industries like semiconductors, prepackaged software, which make up almost 40% of the affected suppliers, They also saw declines in their patent quality, even if they weren't directly selling to the sanctioned entity.
Wow.
And crucially, they also experienced a measurable drop in their R&D expense ratio, about 1.7 percentage points down.
Meaning they're investing less in their own future.
Precisely. U.S. companies started actively investing less in their own R&D pipelines. So the policy seems to have inadvertently harmed America's own domestic firms by disrupting business ties, limiting access to the huge Chinese market, and ultimately weakening the overall U.S. capacity for future tech breakthroughs.
Which brings us right back to today and this latest policy push from Washington. Given that the current approach, focusing on the specific end user, seems flawed because China can just, shuffle things around.
Right, co-opt other firms.
Lawmakers are now urging this huge escalation, restricting the sale of pretty much all products made with or containing U.S. software.
Yeah, this is critical. They're shifting the target from the finished product, like the chip, to the foundational tools like the EDA software we talked about at the start. The argument from Republicans, as you mentioned, is that the current approach is leaky. They argue the Chinese Communist Party can essentially compel any company in China, especially if it gets state investment, to act on behalf of a sanctioned entity.
So the civilian-military distinction is blurred, they'd say.
That's the core argument. You can't reliably trust that distinction when the state has that level of influence or control.
Okay, so they're proposing this foundational technology license requirement for exports to basically all PRC entities. What's the practical real-world implication if they actually did something that sweeping?
Oh, it would be a game changer, a massive one. Experts are warning that, nearly everything imaginable is made with U.S. software at some point.
Everything.
Think about it. The proposed measure could hit this dizzying array of exports globally, high-end laptops, commercial jet engines, if they used U.S. software anywhere in the design, simulation, or even manufacturing process, potentially blocked from export to China.
So it wouldn't just affect U.S. companies selling to China?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Think about the global supply chain.
Yeah.
A German car maker, for example. If they used Microsoft software for design collaboration, or maybe U.S.-developed simulation tools for crash testing, under this proposal, they might suddenly be blocked from exporting those cars to the massive Chinese market.
The global economic ripple effect
Would be enormous. You'd force international allies into making immediate, very painful choices about their own supply chains and their relationship with both the U.S. and China.
And the source material we looked at also points out that Beijing hasn't exactly been caught flat-footed here. They've apparently been preparing for this kind of decoupling scenario for over 20 years.
That's right, accelerating their big Made in China 2025 initiative, specifically pushing to replace critical Western enterprise software, things like ERP systems, logistics planning, even billing management with domestic Chinese alternatives. They saw this pressure coming.
So let's try to synthesize this.
Okay. Well, we've clearly laid out this asymmetric impact, haven't we? U.S. suppliers facing immediate financial hits, innovation headwinds, while their Chinese counterparts seem to be gaining market share, hiring people, and critically, accelerating their path towards fundamental technological independence. The sanctions, as they stand now, they might be succeeding in denying some specific tech in the very short term. But the cost seems to be spurring Beijing's long-term, yes, expensive, but ultimately self-sufficient R&D machine into higher gear.
Right. So the debate really becomes clear for you, the listener. If protecting national security means using economic policies that result in American companies shrinking their workforce, cutting their R&D budgets, and seeing the quality of their innovation diminish, is America truly prepared to broaden these painful restrictions? Are we ready for something like the proposed sweeping software curbs, knowing the potential cost in this long, drawn-out fight to maintain technological leadership? What price, ultimately, are we willing to pay to try and protect our foundational technology?